In example 2, we're going to first of all find the area, and then now we're going to add on square rooting to find the length of the side. Okay, so we want to make sure we recognize which part is the area. The area is that squares are that we find inside, and then when square root is going to give us the side length. So I'm going to break this down again into the triangles that will let me find the square area. So this triangle in here is going to be, if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's going to be 8 by 8 triangle. So 8 times 8, but it's only a triangle, so I only want half of that. 64 divided by 2 is 32 squares. So there is 32 squares. Okay, so make sure you're filling that out as we go. And then because all four triangles are exactly the same, I can fill in my area for the rest of these. These are 32 squares. There's 32 squares in here. There's 32 squares in here. So make sure you fill that out on your diagram. And then the area is going to be 32 plus 32 plus 32 plus 32, or we can do 32 times 4. And the area is going to be 128 squares. Okay, so that is going to be the area. I'm just going to shade that in. This area is going to be represented by the 128 squares. So if I were to count the individual squares, there's 128 of them. Now that is not a perfect square. So when I square root that 128, so make sure you can put this into your calculator. So do square root 128. That number that you get should be 11.313. So I'm just going to round that to 11.31. That represents the edge length. Okay, so it's going to be 11.31 along that edge. So if I were to count along the grid, I should kind of rotate this around and count along the grid. My edge length is 11.31 units. In this next one here, we'll do the same thing. We're going to count the area. We're going to work out the area of these triangles by using the triangle formula. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Make sure you count all the way into the corner. And then divide by 2. So in the 5 times 9 is 45. Okay, again, make sure you're doing the calculations. And dividing by 2 gives me 22.5 squares. So that's 22.5. We know that this is going to be 22.5 here. This triangle over here is going to be 22.5 as well. This triangle at the bottom, they are all the exact same 4 by 9 triangle. So this is going to be 22.5 as well. So the total, that area is 22.5. The one in the middle, that's a square. So we're going to have to count 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a 4 by 4 square. We can count 16 squares in there. So we're going to get 16 squares. So that red area is going to be 22 plus 22, sorry, 22.5 plus 22.5 plus 22.5 4 times. So we have 90 squares plus the 16 squares right in the middle. And that's going to give us a total of 106 squares. Okay, so that's going to be represented by the area. So this is a square, so we're going to be calculating area. So we're not calculating length. This is to do with how many squares make up this area. And the edge length clearly cannot be 102. But the edge length we're going to work out by square rooting. So this is going to be 106 squares. The side length then is, Okay, again, do it on your calculator to go from area to side length, we square root. So make sure you can type this into your calculator. And when we do side length, you should work out with a value a little bit more than 10, because 100 squares gives us a side length of 10. So this gives us 10.295, so I'm going to round that to 10.30. So that's a little bit less, a little bit more than 10. Okay, so if we take a look at those two squares, one's about 1 unit longer than the other. This last one, we need to make sure we draw in from the corners. We want to draw straight along the grid. And when we do that, from this bottom corner, we're going to go straight up along the grid lines. And from this right corner, we're going to go straight across from the grid lines. And that's going to break up into the triangles that we want. So the triangle that we're going to focus on, we're just going to do one at a time. It's 3 high and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Make sure you go all the way to the corner. That's going to be 3 times 11 divided by 2. That's going to give us 16.5. So we're going to have 16.5 squares in here. That means that those other 3 by 11 triangles, they're all going to be 16.5 as well. So 16.5 as well. So when the red area that I have there is going to be 16.5 times 16.5, sorry, 16.5 plus 16.5. So we're going to do that 4 times. So really it's easier to multiply since we have groups of things. 16.5 times 4 gives us 66. Okay, so far we have 66. We can't forget the area in the middle. So it's going to be counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's an 8 by 8 square. And we can count actual 64 squares in there. So 8 squared is 64. Okay, so the total area, when we add that up, that total area is going to work out to be 130 squares. So that area is 130 squares. Okay, and again, that I'm going to shade that. That area is 130. So if we were to count up all the squares that we can fit in there, we should be able to count up exactly 130 individual squares, although some of them are kind of partial squares, but if we put them all together, we're going to get 130. And then to find the side length, so area to square root, so area to side length, we square root. So that side length works out to be 11.40. Okay, so just a little bit longer than the first square because it has just a little bit more area. That one had 128, this one had 130.